Hi guys, it's Ariane, and today I thought I'd take you through 6 of my most recent reads. These aren't all the books I've read in this past month, but it's the ones I most want to talk about. First up, I read The Stranger Times by C.K. McDonald. This is a really interesting book. It's about a woman named Hannah whose life sort of implodes unexpectedly and she has to find herself a new job. She studied English at university, so she decides to apply to The Stranger Times, which is a newspaper that reports on the strange and wacky and wonderful. It's only her first week there when there is a huge tragedy and The Stranger Times has to investigate and do some hard-hitting journalism, and they discover that maybe the things that they report on aren't quite so unbelievable after all. I ended up giving this book 3 stars out of 5. I thought it was a good book and it was conceptually a really amazing story, and I really liked the basic idea for it, but I think its execution left a bit to be desired. I think it was just very basic. It was a very basic story. It was very plot driven, and while sometimes I like that, I do tend to prefer my stories to be more character focused than plot driven, but overall, it was really good. I think, honestly, this would make an amazing screenplay. It would be such a good movie. And if they ever do create a movie out of this, I will definitely be watching it. I would definitely recommend, if you're up for something just light, something easy to read, something that doesn't take too much brain power. The characters were really good, but again, I think they were limited by the medium that they were in. I think if they were on screen, they would have felt a bit more full and a bit more actualized, whereas on the page, they just sort of fell a little bit flat, or maybe just a bit unbelievable, or I didn't really feel like they were 3D characters. I just felt sort of like they were lines on a page, and I feel like if it ever became a live action series, it would do really well. So start the petition, someone please. Okay, next up was a book that I saw everywhere on BookTube and Bookstagram and BookTok, and I thought I finally have to get to it, and that is Lore by Alexandra Bracken. Okay, so this is set in a world where the Greek gods and goddesses are real and known by all, and every 7 years, Zeus has cursed 7 of the Olympians to take mortal form and roam the earth in a hunt. And they have to survive a whole week as mortals, with humans hunting them for their power. We follow mainly this girl named Lore, who used to be one of these hunters but has since gotten out of the game and really wants to stay that way, but unfortunately circumstances happen and she's brought back into it. I gave this one 3.5 stars. It wasn't my favorite, but it definitely was entertaining. I think my favorite part was seeing the Greek gods and goddesses put in a modern setting and seeing how they adapted to technology and society. The characters were really good. I really enjoyed Lore as a protagonist. She had just the right amount of tragic backstory to make her interesting, but she wasn't waylaid by any of that. She's grown up to be this really strong character, this strong woman, and she fights for what she believes in. And I could really relate to her in a lot of ways. One of the reasons I couldn't give this a higher rating was because I felt like all the names of things sometimes got a little bit too much. It was very info jumpy at times. It was at times a challenge to keep up with the momentum and keep up with all the names of the tribes and the Greek gods and everything. Maybe someone who's more knowledgeable in Greek mythology wouldn't have struggled as much, but I definitely had a bit of a hard time remembering all the names and things, so I would watch out for that. There were some twists in this one that really surprised me, which is great because usually I'm not surprised by twists. I usually have a really sixth sense for them. I can see them coming, but with this, I sort of did. I was like, maybe they're not going to do that, and then they did something that really surprised me, and I liked it a lot. So yeah, it's definitely good, and I think it's definitely worth the hype. Next up is This Savage Song by V.E. Schwab. If you don't know what this is about, basically it's set in our world in more of a post-apocalyptic future where violent crime breeds monsters. So if there's a murder, a violent monster is born from that, and then that monster can kill other people and create more monsters, and it's generally a very scary time. We follow Kate Harker and August Flynn, who are kids on either side of this warring city, just trying to survive, just trying to get through the day. They are forced into an unexpected alliance when there is an assassination attempt on their lives. And they have to go on the run, and the story goes from there. V.E. Schwab is one of my all-time favorite authors. You can see my V.E. Schwab shelf up here. I absolutely adore her. This book was maybe not my favorite of hers. In the end, I gave it 3.5 stars. I thought it was good, but it was lacking a little bit of flair that I thought some of her other books really brought. I think what I loved most was the concept and the characters. I thought the characters were really interesting and they were well-rounded, and I could understand their motivations. I know there's a lot of talk in the V.E. Schwab sort of realm about her characters being very cookie cutter. I understand where they're coming from, but I personally really love the dynamic of her characters, where the strong female is dangerous and angry at the world, and then there's like a very Hufflepuff sort of a guy, and it's these two opposites thrown together. I really enjoy that kind of dynamic. Again, the world was so interesting. I really enjoyed the idea that violent crime breeds violent monsters. I thought it was so interesting. One of my favorite things about this was the way that music was used as a weapon. It's something that's really unique. I haven't really seen it done before in any other books that I've read, and as a musician myself, I've really enjoyed seeing it weaponized. I think it could have been utilized a little stronger. That's why I didn't rate it any higher. I guess I just feel like it didn't live up to what it could be. I think she just kind of scraped along on the bare bones, and it just could have been so great, but it was just a little bit flat for me. It's part of a duology, and I do have the second book up on my shelf, but I haven't read it yet, hoping to get to it very soon. Up next is a book I actually read on my Kindle, so I don't have a physical copy with me, but that was Library of the Unwritten by A.J. Hackwith. I hope that's how you pronounce it. I'm very sorry if I butchered it. This book is about angels, demons, libraries in hell, and stories that go unfinished. I don't want to give too much away. I really enjoyed this story. I gave it 4.5 stars. It was amazing. But basically, as a brief synopsis, it's set in a library in hell that is made up of all the unfinished books in the whole world throughout all of time. And occasionally, if the author is very passionate about their work, or if the story starts to have a mind of its own, the book can manifest itself into a character in the book and then escape, and the librarian of the Unwritten Wing in hell has to go and track it down and bring it back to the library. Throughout the course of the book, they travel not only to hell, but also to heaven, to Valhalla, and to Earth, and to all sorts of unnamed afterworlds that have existed throughout time. As a writer, I think I really enjoyed this story. There's something so entrancing about the idea of one of your books coming to life and having thoughts and feelings and actions of its own. And I think all writers sort of feel that way about their books in some regard, but this took it very literally, and it was a lot of fun. I really loved it. The characters were interesting and sweet, and their dynamics were so cool. There's like a bit of a found family trope, which I absolutely love. The magic system and the ideological questions that were brought up throughout the course of the book really fascinated me. So in this world, basically, after death, the human soul weighs itself and decides what its punishment or reward will be in the afterlife. I thought that was such an interesting concept. I really enjoyed it. And then seeing the characters and what their afterlives were, and then understanding why they had chosen those. It was heartbreaking, it was beautiful, it was really well done. The writing was so beautiful. I think out of all the books I read this month, the writing in this one was my favorite. I highlighted so many passages. And again, if you're a writer, I would absolutely recommend. It's such a good book, and it really gives a sense of whimsy to writing. And I think it also motivates you to finish unwritten stories, because that's what the whole thing's about. It's part of a series. I haven't bought the sequels yet, but I intend to very soon, and I will give my thoughts as I finish the series coming up. Alright, second to last, I read Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. I have to admit, the only reason I picked this up was because the Netflix series is coming out in a few weeks, and I really wanted to read the book before I watched it. But I am so glad I picked it up now. It was so good. I feel like at this point, everyone and their mother has read this book, but in case you haven't, basically this book follows Lena Starkov, who's a map maker who discovers she has a kind of crazy power that no one's really seen for a very long time, and this power might be the only thing that can save this whole world from certain doom. I don't want to give too much other than that away. If you're looking forward to watching the show, I would recommend reading the books. If you haven't, they're very good. I'm reading the second one at the moment. I actually tried to read Six of Crows a few years ago, and I didn't really gel with it, and I think it's because I didn't read this first. I think that's really the key, because I was so lost in the world and the characters. But now, reading this one, I jumped straight into it. I was so invested. The plot is so fast. It was just one thing after another, and it just kept happening, and it kept me turning the pages up until midnight, and it was so good. So I gave this 4 stars. The only reason it isn't higher is probably because I did feel like it, despite enjoying the pace, I felt like it might have just been a tad rushed. I would have liked to have spent longer with the characters themselves and sort of understood their motives, because I felt like it was just like something happens and then there's a beat and then the character acted. But there was no real exploration of how that character came to this decision or the factors that went into decision making, and it just felt a little bit surface level. That's no criticism on the story. I think it's just the writing style that I didn't gel with 100%, but I still really enjoyed it. As I said, I could not put it down. It's riveting. It's such a good book, and I'm so incredibly excited for the TV series. I will say I didn't totally feel the chemistry between Alina and Mal, who is her childhood best friend. I felt like because all that relationship, all its early days and its building blocks, all of that happened off page. So I didn't really feel connected to it. It was just like, oh, he's my best friend. That's it. It was very much a Gale from Hunger Games sort of a situation where they have all this history, but you don't really see it. You just kind of hear about it. And it's one of those things where it's like tell, don't show, when it should be show, don't tell. So I struggled to sort of buy into that chemistry and buy into that relationship. But of course, that's a totally personal opinion. I will admit the Darkling was one of my favorite characters. I didn't really see where that would go, and how it went surprised me, but not negatively. I thought it was interesting, and I'm really looking forward to seeing Ben Barnes portray the Darkling on screen, because I am a huge Narnia fangirl, and I love my Prince Caspian. So okay, and finally we have another ebook that I read on my Kindle. This is one that has been all over everything for so long, and finally I just bit the bullet and read it, and that is The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. So by now, I think this is another one that everyone's read, but in case you haven't, it's about a magical realism sort of a world where people have powers, and there are also creatures with powers like phoenixes and sprites. There is this department in the government that looks after these magical people, particularly the magical children in orphanages growing up into their powers. And we follow one caseworker named Linus, who gets sent on a special assignment for a month to the orphanage in the Cerulean Sea, and has to keep himself apart from what's happening there and report on it and make sure that it's suitable to stay open and keep these kids safe. I really enjoyed Linus as a character. I thought, I didn't like him at first, actually, to be honest. I was reading and I was like, oh, he's just boring and he's straight-laced and it's unexciting. And I also felt like his determination to be apart from things was so sad, and I just didn't really gel with it. But as I kept reading, and I think everyone will agree that as you read, he starts to really thaw, and I ended up, by the end of it, just, my heart was just so full. That he was such a sweet guy, and the romance he found with Arthur was just, oh my gosh, it was so sweet. If it wasn't obvious, I gave this 5 stars. I thought the writing was beautiful, and the world and the family dynamics, the found family trope, which again, I love. It all just sort of culminated into this amazing book that at first I was sort of like, what's the point of this book, and you know, why does everyone love it so much? But as I kept reading, I absolutely saw where everyone was coming from in their raving about it, and I agree, it's spectacular. It made me cry a little bit at it was like 1 a.m. and I was in my room and there were tears, and I was like, no, in a good way. It was good tears, because it's such a sweet book, and I would absolutely recommend it, particularly if you're a fan of that sort of found family and kids coming into their own and men with stone hearts thawing and melting, and it was so good. And in case you were wondering, Chansey was my favorite character, because all he wanted in life was to be a bellhop, and it was so cute. It was the cutest thing I've ever seen, and I just absolutely loved it. Oh my gosh, with his little bellhop hat and he was always he was begging Linus to do his laundry. It was so cute. And yes, so Chansey, and also Talia. I love Talia as well. She was very sweet. I also think the discussions about sort of segregation in society that are brought up was really interesting. I think it's applicable to our world today, so I think it's definitely a necessary read to sort of break people out of their perceived misconceptions about, you know, people who are different to us and potentially, in our world, minorities. It definitely had a very strong message about individuality and privacy and freedom. I honestly think this is a book that should almost be studied in schools, because it was so on the nose about political and societal issues we have today, but it was put into this fantasy, fun context that was able to make it feel lighthearted when actually what it was discussing was quite serious. So I can't really talk anymore about how much I loved this book. 5 whole shining stars. I loved it. Please, please read it if you haven't already. Okay guys, so that's most of the books I read in March. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you got some recommendations out of this. Drop some comments below and let's talk about these books if you have read them, if you want to read them. Are you excited for the Shadow and Bone series? Please let me know. Should I read Six of Crows? Because I think it's involved in the show, even though they don't cross over in the books, but it's in the show they do. So I'd really like to hear if you think I will enjoy that after reading Shadow and Bone. As always, guys, thank you so much for listening. I'm sorry I've been AWOL the last few weeks. I've had some technical difficulties, but everything is up and running again and looks to be in the clear, so hopefully I'll be uploading weekly from now on. And I know some of you guys have found me through fanfiction, and I just want you to know that I really appreciate every single one of you, and big things are coming in that regard as well. So thank you for your support. It means the absolute world, and I'll see you guys next time with another new video.